Hi, my name is Jonathan Hilberg. I'm the gaming editor at Reviewed, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Asus ROG Ally. Valve's Steam Deck really changed the handheld gaming PC landscape when it was released in early 2022. And although smaller companies like Ayaneo and OneXPlayer have released Windows-based competitors since then, none have been able to come close to the cost of the deck. That is, until the Asus ROG Ally came out. The processor is the AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme. That's 8 cores, 16 threads, and it turbos up to 5.10 gigahertz. Graphics, they're using AMD's RDNA 3 with 12 compute units, and that goes up to 2.7 gigahertz. 16 gigabytes of 6400 mega transfers per second LPDDR5 RAM. Comes with 512 gigabytes of PCIe Gen 4 storage. That's a 2230 NVMe SSD drive, so one of the short ones. 40 watt hour battery, 1080p display that goes up to 120 hertz refresh rate, 7 inches adaptive sync, IPS touchscreen. We measured and found that it hit 524 nits of peak brightness, which is really bright. Had an 1190:1 contrast ratio, 97.3 coverage of the sRGB color space, which is really, really good. As for size, it's 11 inches by 4.37 inches by 0.83 inches at the thinnest point. Weighs 21.44 ounces, and connectivity really covered. It has Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 5.2, one USB-C port at the top with DisplayPort 1.4 out. You can also charge through it. One 3.5 millimeter headphone microphone combo jack, a UHS 2 TF card reader, and it also comes with Asus's proprietary ROG XG mobile interface, and you can connect the Ally to their proprietary standalone external graphics cards. The ROG Ally comes in two configurations. The $700 512 gigabyte model that we reviewed with the Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor, and a lower tier Z1 non-extreme version that will release sometime later this year for $600. The ROG Ally has 3 pre-configured power modes that users can switch between. Silent mode, which caps the CPU at 9 watts, performance mode, which caps the CPU at 15 watts, and turbo mode, which caps the CPU at 25 watts when on battery and 30 watts when plugged in. But you can also set your own custom power profiles. So what we like about the Ally: the hardware is truly special. The chassis of the ROG Ally is 10% lighter and slightly smaller in all dimensions than the Steam Deck, despite having the same size screen. Asus is using dual fans to noticeably reduce noise as well as heat. While I consider the front-firing speakers on the deck to be pretty good, the speakers on the ROG Ally are just hands down much better. They're bright and clear, without distortion, even at 100% volume, and loud enough that 30% will be adequate for most people using it. The most impressive part of the speakers is the directional audio. Whether it was running past NPCs or trying to pin down where enemies are, I never lost track of where the sound was coming from, and they are good enough to listen to music to. Even the ergonomics aren't bad. So instead of using deep grips like the deck, Asus opted for rounded bottom corners that nestle into the user's palms while you're playing. While it's a bit less comfortable than the Steam Deck, this design is offset by the slightly lower weight of the Ally, and I never really found myself fatigued while using it. Of course, the biggest draw of the ROG Ally is the performance, which is top tier. Asus claims that the Ally is 50% to 100% faster than the Steam Deck at comparable thermal design power, TDP, which is how much the CPU is drawing, thanks to the new AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor, a tweaked version of what appears to be AMD's Ryzen 7840U mobile CPU that you'll see in some laptops with Radeon 78M integrated graphics, and I am inclined to believe those figures after testing. For instance, Spider-Man Miles Morales, a game that I do play all the time on my Steam Deck, without upscaling, it runs at about 20 to 30 frames per second on the Steam Deck at a mix of low, medium settings. The same settings on the ROG Ally in performance mode, I measured a steady 40 to 50 FPS at the same 25 watt total system power draw, and sometimes even up to 60 FPS. That was before enabling turbo mode, and doing so allowed me to comfortably play at native 1080p without upscaling. It was a similar story in Horizon Zero Dawn. I recorded 36 FPS with the original settings, using the in-game benchmark at 1080p without upscaling, and a solid 50 frames per second at 720p, and Steam Deck can only dream of hitting those numbers. If you turn on turbo mode and FSR, which is AMD's proprietary upscaler, which takes lower resolution, puts out a higher resolution image, that number went up to 54 frames per second, which is more than adequate enough if you want to hook the Ally up to a gaming monitor or your TV to use it as a console. Another thing I really liked about the Ally is the gorgeous screen. It is 1080p, like I said, 120 hertz, and it's just as good as Asus promised, and maybe even a little better. So as I mentioned, after running that slew of display tests on it, which is what I usually do with gaming monitors I review. I measured a max peak brightness of 524 nits. I measured 97.3% coverage of the sRGB color space and a contrast ratio of 1190:1. Where the Ally really shines is that 120 Hz refresh rate, especially for 2D games like Hades or Enter the Gungeon or Hollow Knight. Even at 1080p, I was able to get well over 120 FPS and hit the frame cap, even on the silent power setting on those games. It might seem like overkill, but I prefer maxing out the frame rate in fast-paced games like those. It also reduces input latency, so it just feels better to play. Asus made switching between resolutions and frame rates quite easy. If you press the command center button on the left side, it brings up a bunch of options you can toggle, including settings to swap the desktop resolution between 1080p and 720p, as well as changing the screen's refresh rate between 60 Hz and 120 Hz. You can also set an in-game frame cap from that same menu. You can switch between performance profiles, change the brightness, manually toggle control schemes, adjust the RGB, and more. Finally, the value is also phenomenal. For $700, which is only $50 more than the most expensive Steam Deck, you get way more performance and better hardware across the board, apart from the 40 watt-hour capacity battery, which is also used in the Steam Deck. The Ally is also being sold in Best Buy rather than a tightly controlled first-party store like Steam. The deck has only gone on sale once since its release for the anniversary, but I wouldn't be surprised if Best Buy or Asus regularly discounts the Ally, including for Black Friday or Cyber Monday. You also get a warranty from a large company, and you can test it in store before you buy it. So what I don't like, the software is unfortunately buggy. As good as the ROG Ally's hardware is, the software side is a bit of a letdown. Asus has installed Windows 11 on the Ally and included a few pieces of software like the command center to help smooth out the experience, but don't expect a seamless experience like navigating SteamOS. In practice, if you're still running Windows with some added menus, don't expect to minimize games and bounce around programs. Speaking of buggy software, the bigger issue is Windows itself. It just has those typical Windows problems. For instance, after one restart, the touchscreen no longer worked and I had to fix it by disabling and re-enabling it in Device Manager. But if you're a less technical user who just wants like a pick up and play device like the Steam Deck, a failure like that could be really off-putting. Don't expect seamless connectivity either. On my first few attempts to play Horizon Zero Dawn and Spider-Man Miles Morales through Steam, I couldn't get any of the inputs to register. I just had to manually enable Xbox controller support in the Steam settings. So again, not a deal breaker. If you're already a PC gamer, you might be used to dealing with this kind of thing, but it's still a hassle. Finally, the battery life is kind of a bummer. Despite how much I like the ROG Ally, the Steam Deck still has it beat for low power efficiency. The deck can drop its CPU power drop down to 4 watts thanks to its custom APU. If you're playing 2D indie game or emulating an older title, that can net you 5 to 6 hours of playtime. These are figures I've experienced in the real world. That really isn't the case with the ROG Ally. The major weakness is that 40 watt-hour battery. I'm not really sure why Asus chose such a small one. I opened up the handheld and they had plenty of space for more battery. I don't understand why they went with that. So even if you set the Ally to silent mode, which caps the CPU at 9 watts, you'll usually see a system power draw of about 13 to 15 watts in games. That's everything. And that'll get you about 3 hours of playtime, if a little less. With the performance preset enabled, you're looking at 2 hours or less of playtime, the same as the Steam Deck at 25 watts. And just forget about using turbo mode if you're not plugged in or you're not close to an outlet. You'll get about an hour. If you just want to use the Ally as a tablet for web browsing or watching videos, it will sit power, use only a few watts, and that's fine. But even if you set a manual CPU power limit of 7 watts, while gaming, you will not match the Steam Deck for performance or battery life. So overall, the pros are the hardware is truly special, the performance is top tier, the screen is gorgeous, and the value is really hard to beat, especially by those smaller third-party manufacturers. But as for the cons, the software is buggy, there's typical Windows issues, and the battery life could definitely be better. So should you buy the Asus ROG Ally? Yes, especially if you don't mind the launch day kinks. It's just really good. If you wanted to buy a handheld gaming PC, you really had 2 options up until this point. So the Steam Deck at $399 and up, or a hand-built alternative from a small company like Ayaneo using a more powerful processor, but you'll probably pay about $1,200 for it, and it will take forever to ship, and warranty support is very iffy. With the release of the ROG Ally, Asus has effectively crushed all competitors looking to differentiate themselves with higher power components. You can buy the Ally in a brick-and-mortar store after testing it out first, and like I said, it will be backed up by a warranty. If not from Asus, probably from Best Buy if it's not working out of the box. I originally wasn't too keen on the Ally during my first day of testing, but as soon as I started thinking of it more of a Windows device and less as a specialized handheld like the Steam Deck, my problems really went away. If you opt for the Ally over the deck, you'll be faced with potentially more issues, and you might have to poke around more for answers, but like most PC gaming handhelds anyway, it's a more device for tinkerers. If you're already a Windows gamer, there won't be anything too unfamiliar. It's pick up and play. Will the Asus ROG Ally get better over time? I'm absolutely certain it will. And the amount of gaming power that they've managed to pack into such a small body is alluring enough to overlook the initial hiccups. The power issues might even get sorted out, as AMD has promised that the Z1 and Z1 Extreme are the first in a new Z line of handheld gaming processors, so we'll probably see them elsewhere too, but they'll be likely more optimized as we get closer to the Ally's release date. Even if the Ally is off to an uneven start, it's promising and powerful enough out of the box that I have to recommend it. If you want to read the full review, head to review.com, and thank you for watching.